Good day. My name is Gregory Scott. It's March 16th, 2020, and I'm pleased to discuss my experience as it relates to living, working, and spending a significant time of the formative years of my life post-baccalaureate in Lower Manhattan, specifically as a real estate broker consultant to many of the financial institutions and other corporate entities located in Lower Manhattan. I worked for Cushman & Wakefield for 25 years. Cushman & Wakefield was started in 1916 with an office in Manhattan. Its second office was in Lower Manhattan. Lower Manhattan is the third largest office market district in the country, United States. Midtown Manhattan is first, Chicago is second, and then Lower Manhattan in and of itself, consisting of the office space below Canal Street, Canal Street. And at the time I entered the business in Manhattan, I was a financial analyst. It was 1992. I had learned at the seat of the masters of the business, people who invented it, people who thrived in it, and office space and the occupants, the business, the commerce, the trade, and the unique mixture of culture and commerce was fascinating to me from the start, and I never lost interest in how each turn of the street could just as easily reveal the historic Fulton Fish Market or the Clinton Battery, which protected New York Harbor, how Ellis Island was just always a short distance over the Western Front, so to speak, of the Battery. Having lunch at Fraunces Tavern, or just spending time at Fraunces Tavern. As I was saying, did enjoy and felt very close connection to places like Fraunces Tavern, where George Washington bade farewell to his troops at the end of the Revolution. Federal Hall, which was just up the street where Washington gave his inaugural address, right on the corner of Broad and Wall Street, where the New York Stock Exchange was, and the historic nature of each and every turn. As I mentioned, the Fulton Fish Market. I went to work. I used to get in early, park my car at the Fulton Fish Market when it was on Fulton Street. Saw the large tuna fish dropping in the puddles, having them picked up, the longshoremen with their hooks, fires burning out of the garbage cans in the winter to keep them warm. It was scenes from like Gangs of New York. The people that I worked with knew all the stories, did all the deals, created Lower Manhattan. And my job, specifically at the beginning, was to just scour the streets, knock on the doors, make the phone calls, and just learn it, live it, and breathe it. Every building, every floor, every square inch of Lower Manhattan. So, starting in 1992, it was a pretty hard shock, an entrance to the real world, so to speak, when the World Trade Center towers were bombed by 2, 3, or 4 Islamic fundamentalist terrorists that had rented a truck in North Bergen and filled it with diesel oil and explosives, drove it into the common parking garage under both buildings, and detonated the bomb, blowing out my recollection is 4 or 5 levels of the lower level, killing several people. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed was ultimately prosecuted and convicted and served. But the blind cleric Khalid Sheikh Mohammed was ultimately held responsible as the mastermind, and several others went to jail. But it was shocking and jarring, but nothing that could compare to the events that would unfold 9 years later on September 11th, 2001. Fortunately for me, although I had traveled through the Trade Center, through the PATH station every day, twice a day, both coming and going to work, and therefore was in, below, above, and at the property, typically twice a day, 5 days a week. That morning I had been called to prepare for a conference, for a presentation, and was at Cushman & Wakefield's Midtown office on 52nd Street, Black Rock, CBS headquarters building. When I first heard the news that the first plane had hit the first tower. It was at that point that me and the people I was on my team went to a colleague's office and turned the TV on. Nobody knew what was happening. There had been a civilian aircraft that hit the Trade Center many, many years ago, causing relatively little damage, but nothing was known about what happened, except it was a significant event. It was at that time that the infamous shot of the second plane hitting the second tower, virtually disappearing inside of the tower before exploding, that it became very clear that it was a targeted, ingenious, satanic plot to kill innocent people, and that the terrorists were decided to change the world as we knew it, much like the pandemic of 2020. It was horrific. We all knew people that lived and worked on the floors that were burning. Nobody contemplated the fact that the towers would fall initially, until the fires engulfed the top floors. Again, sitting there with real estate brokers and the people that shaped, crafted, molded, and made it their professional everything to know what company was in what space, on what floor. And because we were a rather successful band of brothers, we all knew that Cantor Fitzgerald, was going to be significantly impacted, having just signed a lease for, this is an approximate, but floors 92 through 102 of Tower 2. And just spending the day in the city under lockdown, hearing the F-16s over the skyscrapers of New York is something nobody could ever forget. The thunderous sound of an F-16 echoing through the canyons of Manhattan is just a sound you'll never forget. I went back to work as a quote-unquote essential worker this was a Tuesday, the next Tuesday, and I passed the burning remains, every day for the next 8 years. One of my most vivid recollections is the fact that, as in, I guess, previous disasters or places where you would expect, mass casualties or missing persons or people looking for loved ones, there were pictures and of people with names posted all over the city, and it became quickly apparent, and it was so very devastating to know that there wasn't a lot of hospital admissions, there wasn't a lot of survivors. If you read into the event, you'll know that I believe it was Father Michael Callahan, who was one of the top priests, who was the chaplain of the fire department, died running in to the buildings to give aid and comfort as he saw his devastated firefighters. He just had to be there. And, I knew of and had dealings with the GSA, which is the General Services Administration. So I knew when Seven World Trade was where they kept, where the Secret Service was housed in New York at Seven World Trade, which was actually the first building to collapse. This was the Secret Service headquarters. They had specifically rented out part of the garages when the President of the United States flew to New York, for instance, to give an address to the UN. He would fly to JFK. Marine One would take him from JFK to the helipad at Wall Street, and the limousines that drove him around New York would roll out of Seven World Trade because they were always housed and secured by the Secret Service, who was housed there as well. I was the quote-unquote procuring cause for the United States Southern District of Manhattan's office relocation to 33 Whitehall Street, where they subleased NASDAQ's former headquarters. Wound up being an eminent domain taking of the lease because of the importance of the United States Attorney's Office for the Southern District of Manhattan post 9/11, ipso facto, as well as working on some other projects for them, which included what was anticipated to, a need was anticipated for a significant amount of cold storage, which for all the bodies, which again quickly became apparent there was not going to be a need for cold storage because there essentially were no bodies. And there were tapes of phone calls of people saying goodbye to their loved ones and jumping out the windows. All the footage, the smoke billowing up Day Street on the corner of 195, it was all the sidewalks, the scaffoldings, the people jumping out of the different facades, the people that were lost, the stores that were affected, the wreckage that was remained was part of my everyday before, during, and after.